Well, during the intermission, we have another special guest that just dropped by, Judy Smith, who has a very important history with Earl, just like several of us. She was one as soon as she arrived, or soon after she arrived at UCLA, she began working with Earl. In the lab, and so now, of course, everyone knows Judy has risen through the ladder and has become a very important person on campus. And now, after she retired, she has even gone to become chair of the music department, or Dean. Oh, yeah, you got another promotion. That's right. Okay. But anyway, those earlier times were very special because Judy and I got to UCLA just about the same time. I was a year ahead, but a lot of things happened then, and Earl played a very important role in helping us get integrated in other parts of the campus and becoming part of the Brain Research Institute. And so that was. Now, the general idea, the first priority of this event was to show appreciation to the family of what Earl meant to the university, and for us to learn a little bit more about the family parts, and we've heard a lot about that today. And the first thing that anybody talks about is Earl's exercise habits, and they certainly are legendary. Only thing I'm going to say personally about Earl is, looking back on the time, he actually opened his lab and let me move my lab into his lab. And so then we started doing some of those long duration experiments, and they were fantastic. They were more fun than work. But during that period of time, and thinking about how the environment for science now versus the environment for science then, I was really young in the career, and I was trying to learn how to be a scientist, and I thought when I was there, looking back on it, it was the most pure science environment that you could imagine. He just loved science. He did science. There was nothing else. You never had any discussions about promotion. You didn't have anything that was competitive within science. You didn't hear anything about whether you were publishing in a journal with high impact factor. Those things were not even on the table. It was just pure science and just learning as much as you can. And then coming through the granite world and starting with the spindles. And one of the things that became evident to me when I started thinking about this is that the work, what I would like to do is emphasize the importance and meaningfulness of the work that he was doing at that early stage with spindles. And then Tim, who's going to be speaking next, the idea is, and what he's going to do is tell you a little bit about how almost the same science and questions, he's going to talk about, give you an idea of where that science is today. And then what I'm going to do now, and what we had planned to happen, is the next speaker after me was going to be telling you about how Earl's work led to some really exciting work that's occurring now in fruit flies, where you study how flies are integrating visual and proprioceptive information and so forth. So he had to back out, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a short version of the progression from what Tim is going to talk about to where the questions, the important questions are in another arena where people are asking now, how do you control movement with combining all of the sensory systems? You're constantly receiving visual information, sound information, proprioceptive information. So how important is proprioception in your daily life and how you control movement? And so I'm going to just give you primarily a few videos and some general concepts of just how important proprioception is. Proprioception, one of the main sensory endings of where we get much of our proprioception, is from these muscle spindles. And there's one hypothesis that in terms of controlling motion, like locomotion, that the input from muscle spindles is perhaps the most important source of proprioceptive information. I think that's arguable, but I think it's, the point is that this basic work was important then and provided the roots of what has happened years later. And so this is, you hear this all the time, and this kind of is an illustration. We stand on the shoulders of others because all the ideas from Sheraton and on back all the way through, we're always standing on the shoulders of others. And maybe that's why Earl exercised so much, is because so many people were standing on his shoulders. So, and the other idea and the reason I think that the thing that fits in well with this basic information about the muscle spindle is the importance of knowing about evolution and the role that evolution has helped us in understanding how to control motion. And we've learned quite a bit from the lamprey has taught us a lot about how we walk or how we stand and so forth. And so evolution has been a very, very important part. And now in much of the work that is in neuroscience, it's on the brain. You'll find books about the brain, but you don't find much about the spinal cord. And through the years, I've felt like we've had to defend what's happening in the peripheral nervous system, that there's proprioception and going to the spinal cord, the information being processed. Now, what's fascinating to me is this was recently reported in Science, the size of a brain of a dinosaur that lived millions of years and many millions ago and weighs 10 tons, and they have a brain the size of a plum. And so how could that animal control movement and live so successfully, mate, eat, defend themselves with the brain, just with a brain that size? So the idea is that much of the neural control is really in the spinal cord and in the periphery. And so why can it be so important? It can be so important because it is sensing where your body is all the time. And so, and the brain really doesn't know what to do if it doesn't know where you are. And the brain is telling, or the peripheral nervous system is telling the brain constantly where you are. And the idea of how unimportant the spinal cord is in the peripheral system relative to the cortex is illustrated in this review here, where if you normalize the size of the cortex relative to the rest of the brain, it looks like the spinal cord wouldn't really be very important. So here, most people would put, in this structure here, they would put the cortex up here as controlling everything. And I go overboard and say, well, you have all these sensory systems. And today we're going to focus on how important the proprioceptive information is. And the idea that really we shouldn't even be talking about what's happening here versus what happened here is really one system that's totally integrated. And I felt like I always want to show this because this is just classic anatomy of UCLA from Scheibel and Scheibel. And you see these neurons in the spinal cord, and that is processing all this proprioceptive information and helping the brain to deal with movement. And these are some of the proprioceptive sensors that we have that tells us where all parts of our body is. In other words, when you think about like just even standing and doing something simple and to reach and pick up something, it's more than just the muscles of the finger. Every muscle in your body is being controlled. Your whole body has to know where you are and where you're starting from. So these sensory receptors are, and I'm just going to show you a brief video of this. It's been reported that there are 11 individuals that have been seen clinically that have this condition where they've lost proprioception. They have no proprioception. The brain has full contact with the spinal cord and the periphery, but it doesn't have proprioception. So you might think, well, no big deal, you have vision and you can do pretty well. But these individuals are basically paralyzed. Only a few have gotten beyond the point where they can get out of a chair and do something, even sit up. This guy here, this is on YouTube if you're really interested, but he's just describing how difficult it was. He'd go to the physician and no one could tell him what to do. Why is losing proprioception so severe? It took him several months to go from lying in bed to sitting up. It took him several months to learn how to do that. He eventually even learned to tie a shoe, but that took about 3 months also. So the point is that proprioception is extremely important. And you could see how he was walking. He was trying to walk like a robot, and he was looking. Now, the only way his brain knew where all the parts of his body was what he could see. Now, so what this tells us, I think, what this tells us is something that we recognize from our cell phones. If you want to go from A to B, you want to figure out what the route's going to be. You put in the route or where you want to go, but you have to tell it where you are. And if it doesn't know where you are, it can't tell you how to get there. And I think it's the same with the brain. That the brain doesn't know what to do because it doesn't know where to start. And that's why proprioception is so important. This is just a video showing animals that have no connection with the brain. The spinal cord has been completely cut. And these animals can step forward, they can step backward, and they can step sideways. The only information that they're getting is from proprioception. So that tells you how important proprioception, it tells you how important these spindles and other sensors are. And so that I'm just trying to give you an idea of some of the basic information that Earl was studying. You know, where is it going? What does it mean today? How important is it? And certainly much of that work was part of that. And then some of this work has advanced to the human subjects, where individuals are being stimulated in a way to take advantage of what the spinal cord and the proprioception can do, and the new technologies that are included, such as the exoskeletons that you see here. This individual is being stimulated with transcutaneous stimulation, which is an idea that was that of Yuri Gerasimenko, who's in the back here. And so we've been working on this idea for some time. But again, without the proprioception, you can't do anything. Without the proprioception, the system would be completely flaccid and you couldn't do anything. And this is the same individual. This individual had been paralyzed for about 4 years. And he's also not only completely paralyzed, but then he fell out off the balcony and became, he was completely blind. He became blind when he was about 22, 23. Then he fell off the balcony and got completely paralyzed. And he's the one that was walking in that exoskeleton. But this shows that these individuals, with the proper treatment and taking advantage of the sensory information that's available, that these individuals actually can regain control, can voluntarily control their leg. He had not moved his leg voluntarily since he had been paralyzed. So, and then this is an experiment that Yuri led, where have individuals lying on the side. They're completely paralyzed, and these individuals are, we're trying to find out if they can regain voluntary control, and as the person's trying to move, is wiggling his body, trying to get some motion going, and this is without the stimulation. And when you first start the stimulation, you can see a little bit of movement, and this is, these subjects regain these movements. Some of them regain some movement after being paralyzed for multiple years, regain some movement like this within one session. So, so then with stimulation, and after 18 sessions of being treated, you'll see how much movement that they can make. These data are reported in the literature, but again, it would be impossible to do any of this without proprioception. So in fact, one of the interesting aspects of this is, now we usually think the paralysis is because the brain can't talk to the spinal cord, but probably an important point is that the spinal cord can't talk to the brain to tell it where it is. And so we need to get information back up to the brain as well as back down to the brain. So the same technique we've used with, we now know that it can work with the hands. I won't go into more detail about that, but in fact, actually this experiment has just been published last week. So if you're interested in it. The other thing, when someone's completely paralyzed, they lose control of their trunk. And when they are sitting in a car, they're just like spaghetti. So they need to learn not just hand function and leg function, but need to learn to control the trunk. And the experiment showed that that's possible as well. So I'm going to just quit there, just stop with that idea, just to emphasize to you that proprioception is pretty important, and it's going to play a big role in the future in rehabilitation. Another factor that fits in well with Earl is these adaptations are activity dependent. That is, if you just stimulate or give a certain drug, that doesn't do it. You have to exercise. You have to use the nervous system. So that was pretty consistent with what Earl was doing. So anyway, bottom line is that basic work is good. And so there's a general, you could easily think that this work that was being done then is old stuff and it's not important. But we build on it. Tim?